After all these years, I've got to believe that the mission speaks for itself. That actually every single human being has within them this great desire to end extreme poverty, that no one wants that sort of suffering on this planet. No one wants it. So when we say that we're going to be building a movement that could achieve tangible, real political results that will actually affect the lives of millions of people living in extreme poverty, I'd say 90% of our population on this planet say, yes, I want to be part of that.
Around 12,000 protesters greeted arriving heads of state with a message, "Welcome to hell."
Anti-capitalist protesters clashing with police in riot gear. Smoke bombs, pepper spray, and water cannons, all used to disperse the crowd.
We were able to take Global Citizen on the eve of the G20 this year to Germany and Hamburg, and that was with Shakira and Coldplay and Pharrell Williams.
Atmosphere in Hamburg of that something was happening, both in terms of the protests, but also bigger than that was the opportunity that's created when all these world leaders come into one place.
Guten Abend! Hello, Hamburg!
It's really important for us to be there on the eve of the G20 to send a message to global leaders that, these are critical times we're all facing right now.
Everybody make some noise for Mr. Hugh Evans and his dream called Global Citizen.
As challenging as that was, because the security around the G20 was so tight that, you had protesters outside, you had world leaders planning to attend, you had to make sure every single detail was thought through. And I loved the focus of our team because they were really willing to bring it. They brought it and they said, you know what, we'll do anything we can to make this a success. And they did so.
At these concerts, tons of people there that had to get there by taking action, and that action then converts to policy, and policy is where change happens in our world.
Whether it's the global citizens that have earned the right to be there, or the musicians who are donating their time to play, there's just a real altruistic sense of, doing good.
There's always a special kind of energy at Global Citizen. It's filled with incredible people, incredible leaders, incredible musicians, and I can't think of anywhere else I'd want to be right now.
For a long time, they were known as the group that did that one big concert once a year, and it was a moment. But that moment has really transitioned into being a movement.
I spent most of the festival in Hamburg with Hugh, and we were meeting with, the president of Argentina. We met with Justin Trudeau. Just really trying to continue to lobby for the issues that matter most to global citizens.
We must continue to put pressure on the G20 leaders so that they hear our voices. We are truly louder together. Together is powerful, and together we will make our planet great again. Thank you.
I still have to pinch myself sometimes about where the organization's come and where the movement's grown. Like now the fact that 20 to 30 million people engage every single month with Global Citizen is beyond me.
Hamburg, we love you guys!
Hugh was never safe, and he never wanted to do the same things as other kids wanted to do. He's an initiator. He believes in change.
I didn't really, as a kid, go with the flow so much. I didn't really, care so much about what everyone else was doing. I was intrigued by it, but I was comfortable in my own independence, I think, from a young age. And generally, I think that started probably around the age of 12 or 13.
There had always been this kind of gurgling in his belly that had said, what's out there? There's got to be something more.
We grew up in a middle-class part of Melbourne, but everyone, had privilege. They all had good food on the table. They all had great education. So we wanted to rattle the cage a bit.
Being his bigger brother and being protective of him, I saw at times when he got laid into at school for for fighting for this kind of stuff, which wasn't popular, it wasn't trendy.
This lady from World Vision came and spoke at our school about doing the 40-hour famine. So you basically, from Friday night through to Sunday night, couldn't eat anything.
And I was one of those eager young kids and literally put up my hand and said I wanted to help organize it.
Hugh has a kind of an intensity about him, this kind of manic charisma, which means that people tend to follow him. People tend to listen and do what he says.
He was the top raiser of money in Australia, and so he got a trip to Manila.
Looking back, it wasn't a lot of money. It was probably like $10,000 or $12,000. But for us in those days, that was the equivalent of raising millions of dollars.
Manila wasn't a place I knew anything about, so I was slightly apprehensive, but I knew that Hugh could look after himself, and I think that you need to expand yourself in this world.
I guess I didn't really feel scared until the night we went to Smoky Mountain. I mean, walking through the streets, it was a whole, incredible experience. Like, I remember the slums of Smoky Mountain were piled up what seemed like miles high, shanty on top of shanty on top of shanty. I was placed in the care of Sonny Boy and his family, and we went out exploring around just me and Sonny Boy. And with him by my side, I guess I felt safe in some respects. I think probably the fact that he was introduced to me as a gang leader made me feel a bit safer, even though he was probably only 14 or 15. I actually want to know how old he is today, but he couldn't have been much older than I was.
For Sonny Boy, he just wanted to share his life, to invite Hugh into his family, to share about his experiences, and he did that with such an open heart. I don't think either of them really knew the impact that would have.
When it came time to go to bed that night, it started getting dark, and we went back to Sonny Boy's house, and I brought some food with me. So we started cooking on the ground in this small pot with Sonny Boy and his family, making some rice. We had a bit to eat, and I remember Sonny Boy went out the front and poured the water all over himself. That was his shower that night, and we went back into their small shanty hut, and we laid down with myself and Sonny Boy and his whole family, 7 of us in this long line. I remember listening to all the noises of this slum that night, like surrounded by thousands and thousands of noises, every single creak, rattle, every single, hearing the family sleeping next to me. It was overwhelming in every sense of the word. And seeing cockroaches that were crawling around, like it was intense. And just lying there that night, it struck me that it was pure chance that I was born in Australia and Sonny Boy was born there. We don't deserve or we have no entitlement to the lottery of life that we have. And so it struck me that night that this was going to become much bigger and much more important for me.
That was a pivotal moment for Hugh, being with Sonny Boy, spending time with him and his community.
When I left the Philippines, Sonny Boy gave me his address and said, be in touch. I put his address in my jean pocket, and unfortunately, my mum and I accidentally put that through the wash. So I lost all trace of contact with him.
I don't think I could actually put into words what Manila and Sonny Boy did for Hugh. Sonny Boy changed Hugh's life. He's part of our family folklore, our story.
For the last several years, it's been this photo that I've held with me of the two of us together and nothing else. Like, I didn't even know where his life had come to. I knew nothing about where his life had evolved to. It was this kind of story that I'd told a million times about how it all started for me. It's funny how like a moment, a night can have such a huge impact on your life. And for me, that night in 1998 here in the Philippines, here in Manila, was undoubtedly one of the most important moments of my whole life. And to be back here 20 years later and know that in just an hour or so I'm going to see Sonny Boy for the first time in 20 years is pretty overwhelming. For me, it's like connecting with someone that played such an important role in my life, even if just for a brief second. It was such a hugely important moment for my life, and so I just want to ask him everything.
Even though I was going through high school, I always had a part-time job on the side. 14 years old, I actually got my first paper round. Then I worked at McDonald's, then I worked at a juice bar, then I worked at the local restaurant in my town. Kind of my final year of high school, I'd say, was very much heads down. I said, I really want to see if I can get into law. And so I literally studied every waking hour. I would wake up as early as I could, study through till 11 or 12 at night, which felt like until I was exhausted, and then would wake up and do it all over again. And fortunately, at the end of that, I got accepted to study law, which I was really happy with, and decided to defer my first year out to go and work and live in South Africa at an orphanage for about 100 children orphaned by HIV, AIDS and violence in the region called God's Golden Acre.
He spent a whole year there. He spent he was brave and strong and lived through some really difficult things that happened to you in South Africa.
But that year was just remarkable. Between working at the orphanage every single day, I helped them set up a child sponsorship program from scratch, and we actually took that program and pitched it to Oprah Winfrey. And Oprah came back to the orphanage and went on sponsoring a whole bunch of the kids herself.
My name is Hugh Evans, and I'm the director of the Oaktree Foundation and also the 2004 Young Australian of the Year.
This idea for this organisation called the Oaktree Foundation came to my mind out of this dream that from a tiny acorn, be that the potential of a young person, could grow this massive oak tree that stood for, as Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world. So we want to stand for education worldwide.
He talked me through this idea of Oaktree and the experience that he'd had in South Africa, and I thought, you know what, you're saying all these things that I felt about my volunteering experiences here in Australia that I wanted to do something about.
I was super impressed with what he was doing, and we asked him would he become the volunteer coordinator for all of our volunteers at Oaktree.
That was the start of 2004, and we've been working with each other ever since.
We were very much, bootstrapping this organisation. It has become one of the largest youth organisations in Australia, and it was entirely run by young people under the age of 25.
I couldn't believe that an 18-year-old could start an organisation and that he incorporated it, and I was in my 30s and I didn't even know what incorporation was.
Oaktree started to really grow. Soon we were raising millions of dollars for education, so we built schools, teacher training projects in South Africa, the Philippines, East Timor, Papua New Guinea, Ghana. We were seeing the power of education to transform the world firsthand. But it was that same time that we started to think about this importance of systemic change, that yes, grassroots development matters, but so too does thinking about how do we change the systems that keep people poor in the first place. And so we started working earnestly in those days we were inspired by what Bono and others had done with the Make Poverty History campaign in the UK and around the world. And so we said, could we bring Make Poverty History to Australia?
And I hadn't really put on a concert before, and neither had Hugh. But what we had done was put on plenty of dinners and events, and we figured it couldn't be that hard. And when we got back to Melbourne and we started talking to World Vision and Oxfam and the NGOs that we've all heard of, instead of saying, you crazy young people, go away, they said, that's a really interesting idea. And they started suggesting musicians they knew who we could get to play.
We were off to the races, and we didn't think it was going to be bigger than a local event. We thought it was going to be strictly local. But then one day I was at university studying away, and I got a phone call from Bono's team, and it was Paul McGuinness and his team calling with their thick Irish accent, Bono, U2's manager, and they said, hey boys, we're coming to Melbourne and Bono wants to perform at your Make Poverty History concert. And we thought the whole thing was a prank call because we couldn't believe it. It was beyond our wildest imagination in those days. And he said, and he wants to perform with Pearl Jam, is that okay? And we're like, of course it's okay. And
Hugh freaked out. He didn't know how to deal with it. And I remember standing in a circle when Bono arrived, myself and Hugh and Dan and a couple of others, and we shook hands with him, and he took off his glasses and everyone went, ooh. Because Bono is this guy who, didn't take off his glasses. And that sense of validation, to have him turn around and say to us, I want you to know that I'm not the important person here. You guys are the important people here. That I can only do what I do because thousands of people like you are standing behind me.
Right now, Pearl Jam Bono!
And all of a sudden the event got international attention as the BBC and CNN picked it up. And 1 million Australian citizens bought our white armband. And that was when the politics started to follow, because when you had all these young people, plus you had all these, we call them soccer mums, committed to this cause at the same time, all of a sudden politicians start to take notice. So to say that I was terrified was an understatement. I was absolutely and utterly terrified, and it's a very powerful motivator. So I met my wife at Cambridge, Daniela, and I asked her to marry me after we'd been dating for about a year or so, and I knew she was the one, so to speak. I just knew it. She's absolutely amazing. We literally finished our honeymoon and flew straight into New York.
We were in a tiny little apartment, a 6th floor walk up in Soho. Hugh's office at that time was literally a broom closet on Lafayette Street that someone had given him.
We knew that New York was the epicenter of social change, given the United Nations is based here, the proximity to Washington and the World Bank and Congress, the fact that this city itself represents the very ethos of being a global citizen.
The first time I met Hugh Evans was in 2010. It was up at Columbia University. He was speaking at a conference there. I was there trying to find a partner, really, to help me develop an idea I had for a festival in Central Park. The initial idea was to try to do a revamp of Live Aid, really, and do something for the younger generation.
They saw what we did with Make Poverty History. They said, could we replicate that here in America? Could we do this enormous concert that was in the heart of New York City during the UN General Assembly meeting that brought together a range of charities under one umbrella working together for something greater than all of us?
And Hugh was with Ryan one day on the West Coast, and he met with a guy named John Silver. He was the manager of Foo Fighters and a couple of others. And they were pitching, and they'd been pitching dozens of people about this concert idea that we had. We didn't have a name for it yet. And John Silver said, you know what? This is a really great idea. I reckon the guys at the Foo Fighters would do this.
And he said to us, he goes, you know what, guys? Dave Grohl only has a few things left on his bucket list, and playing Central Park is one of them. He said, if you guys can get Central Park, the Foos will play.
There hadn't been a concert on a Saturday on Central Park since Simon and Garfunkel back in 1981, and I think Bon Jovi a few years later.
I don't think people realize how quickly that happened and how likely failure was.
New York City is expensive, and no doubt about it. And trying to pull it off in the first year, I didn't even know how we ended up doing it, to be honest, because we had to raise so much money.
What Hugh and the team at Global Citizens was trying to accomplish was nothing short of extraordinary. It was rough. There were definitely some sleepless nights.
So to say that I was terrified was an understatement. I was absolutely and utterly terrified, and it's a very powerful motivator.
July 2012, 2.5 months out from when the event would be. We still needed to raise more money. We hadn't booked all the talent, but we thought we had the Foo Fighters. And we got a phone call from one of the sponsors, and they said, look, we've had this problem. We know we said we were going to be in, and we know we've even drawn up a contract. The contract's not signed. I'm sorry, we're going to have to pull out.
It just felt like we'd reached this precipice where nothing was going to happen from here.
We were down to the final days, because we couldn't, as an organization, we couldn't take a risk in not having enough money in the bank to pull it off.
And I remember so vividly one night just praying. I was like, God, just please bless us with this event. And the next day we woke up and Sumner Redstone invited us to come to his house.
And Sumner Redstone came through in the final hours with the commitment.
No kidding, he wrote a check for $1.5 million on the spot.
The bravest thing I've seen Hugh do was stare down 8 to 10 weeks out of the very first Global Citizen Festival, a sponsor who'd just fallen over, an artist bill that wasn't complete, and have him say, we can still do this. Because every reasonable and rational person around him said, no, you can't. You don't have the money, you don't have the time, you don't have the expertise, and you don't have the performers to be able to pull off a 60,000 person event in a city that you've only just moved to. And he said, yes, I do.
We were able to rally 60,000 young people to the Great Lawn, and the movement started to build from there.
When you saw the artists come on and you saw how the crowds reacted, you just turned back towards the audience from the stage and just realized all these people came out together and they did actions online in support of the world's poor.
Along the way, we'd come up with this name, this idea of global citizen. We'd always talked about this idea of people taking action to get into the events we did. So instead of just saying you have to register and then we'll pick you out of a hat, you actually have to take some action, and then we can put you in a draw to come to the show.
It's really a brilliant concept. It's more than a concert, it's education.
And these are kids that are 20, 30 years old, but they really have this vision and they have this energy, and they are reaching sectors in ways that we never thought were imaginable.
My name is Hugh Evans from the Global Poverty Project, and tonight we've seen over $1.3 billion in new commitments to the world's poor, and this is just the beginning. So stay tuned, because the movement to end extreme poverty is going to grow from here.
We never thought it was going to become something we did ever again. A few days later, Rob Light, who was Stevie Wonder's agent, said Stevie Wonder wants to headline year 2. And we said, there isn't a year 2. You know, we could barely do year 1. And he said, now there is.
So every time you guys do something, it gets bigger.
Jay-Z, together with No Doubt, Carrie Underwood, Fun, The Roots and Tiesto, Pearl Jam, Beyonce, Ed Sheeran and Coldplay.
Is Rihanna, yes. Kendrick Lamar, together with Selena Gomez, Major Lazer, Metallica.
Well, I want to set the stage for people. You got involved in humanitarian work very early in life.
Absolutely, yeah. It started for me at the age of 14 years old. Over all these years, I've tried to reconnect with Sonny Boy. Sadly, I've been unable to. We met long before social media, and his address has now been relocated by the authorities, as often happens with slums.
He did his TED Talk in Canada, and it went extraordinarily well, and just the publicity from that all around the world brought many emails and correspondence from people.
A lady from the community in the Philippines that works for a great local NGO reached out to me and said, you'll never believe this, it's a small world, but we think we know who Sonny Boy is. And I was like beside myself. I was like, you've got to be joking.
To be back here 20 years later and know that in just an hour or so I'm going to see Sonny Boy for the first time in 20 years is pretty overwhelming. So my mind is scattered, and a million thoughts racing through it at the same time.
Hello, kumusta? Nagpapasalamat ako sa kanya, kaya sa tagal-tagal ng panahon may nakaalala sa akin.
He was so thankful to you because it's been so long time ago. Still somebody remember him.
Absolutely. Can you tell him I'm equally thankful to him because he changed my life?
Yeah, something.
I've probably told about 100 million people in the world about you. I've told everyone since that age, actually, since I was 14, I've told the story of meeting you probably about 1,000 times, probably. Yesterday, seeing Sonny Boy for the first time in 20 years was incredibly overwhelming, and I went to bed last night just thinking to myself that often we like to, we tell the story that in the last 30 years extreme poverty's halved, but in some ways I think that masks the present reality of suffering for so many people still living in extreme poverty. And Sonny Boy said himself that he doesn't have hope for his own future, his hope is in his kids.
it's made me stop for a second and say, you know what, I've got to double down. Yes, it's been 20 years, but it's got to be another 20 years because the only way we're going to end this is through concerted efforts, encouraging governments like the government of the Philippines, encouraging the international community, institutions like the World Bank, encouraging major donor countries, but also just getting our hands dirty and doing it.